Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Mills. Here. Commissioner Gibrandal. Here. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Here.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Full house.
Full house. Excellent. Approval agenda. Do you have a commissioner who will move the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Woods, seconded by Commissioner Mills. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? It's approved. Introductions. Do we have any introductions this evening?
No.
Great. Minutes of previous meeting. We don't have any minutes before us this evening. Reports from city administration, city council, planning manager, planning commission officers and committees, written communications and petitions. We'll begin with our city council representative, Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A short number of updates for you. The first three have to do with appointments to commissions and task forces at the city. As you may know, the Center of the City Task Force is being assembled. A first large step in that is assembling a slate of recommendations for City Council's approval to sit on that body. That slate of recommendations were made by Council members Julie Grand and Council member Jeff Hayner last night. It's a diverse group by discipline and seemingly perspective based on resumes, and I'm excited about that. The other update is two of our esteemed colleagues will be leaving us. Their nominations for reappointment were not approved. Mayor Taylor has put forward two names as possible replacements for City Council's approval. Those are Ellie Abrams, an associate professor of architecture at the University of Michigan, and Sarah Hammerschmidt, a senior director at the Urban Land Institute. Again, their resumes and applications can be found publicly accessible, or please feel free to follow up with me if you'd like copies of them. And then the last item, which has to do with land use more specifically, the city council voted to execute its right to first refusal on a property at 1146 South Maple. You all may remember Avalon Housing came forward probably about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, for a development called Hickory Way, which would have been around 70 units of affordable housing in the South Maple area. This property is actually immediately adjacent to it, and the city will hopefully now be moving forward on purchasing it, which would allow Avalon, hopefully in partnership with the city, to build an additional 14 units as an extension of Hickory Way. So exciting way to partner with a nonprofit in the community who's making meaningful impacts on our affordable housing market.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard, do you have a report for us this evening?
Just one brief addendum. City Council also approved funding for a new software system that will replace Trackit. It's Energov, and it'll provide us a lot of updated capabilities for sharing information, project processing, online submission of different types of applications, as well as a return to the ability to map out projects and explore projects both on a list, search, or a geographic basis. So next steps will be executing a contract. There'll be a significant rollout of new software, configuring it for our needs. But we're really excited about that opportunity. That'll impact everything from planning petitions to building permits to city clerk licenses. So very exciting. And then just a quick note for members of the public. I would ask that if you could fill out a card if you intend to speak during any public hearings. Not that you need to sign in, but this is a way that we can ensure that we record your information accurately, and as well as there's an opportunity to submit your email on the bottom of this. In the event that your project of interest is postponed, we will notify you of any upcoming hearings associated with that petition.
Thank you. Planning Commission officers and committees. Are there any reports this evening? All right, written communications and petitions. We have quite a bit to review, as well as a couple last-minute submissions, so if you can look through your packet. We now move on to audience participation. This is the time for audience to address the Planning Commission in regards to items that are not on our agenda. So if you would like to address the Planning Commission in regards to an item that is not on our agenda this evening, you may please step forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. Seeing no one, we will move on to public hearings scheduled for next Planning Commission meeting.
Yes, the publication deadline, as a reminder, because of commissioner absences, the first meeting in July has been canceled. So no confirmations of schedulings until the following meeting, which will be July 15th, if I have that right. So that's why no report in that regard.
Right. Unfinished business. We have our fiscal year 2020 work plan approval, which is in our packet. Mr. Leonard.
Yes, this reflects a discussion at a working session about amendments to your next year's work program. You may recall additionally that this was also included on the last agenda, but the title was included subcommittee appointments and incorrectly didn't include work plans, so we carried it forward. Highlights are, of course, the Planning Commission's annual responsibility for the capital improvements plan, as previously designated by the Planning Commission, a recommendation to undertake a comprehensive review of the master plan, and then ordinance amendments, finalizing the sign ordinance update, which we are in the final stages of, general UDC fixes and updates, which you've already considered some. There will be more on the horizon. Any city council directed amendments for fiscal year 2020, ones that are sort of in the hopper include affordable housing premiums and potential Airbnb or short-term rental regulations. And then transit-oriented development, corridor zoning, that's something we've had some starts and stops over. I'd like to get that resolved in the coming year. And then evaluating our parking standards.
Do you have a commissioner that'll move approval of the work plan? Moved by Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Gibrandal. Discussion on the work plan. All right, seeing nobody. All those in favor, please. Oh. Do we have discussion? Commissioner Ackerman.
I just want to thank staff. Everything on here is, going to be representative of a lot of labor on their part, and just want to express how grateful I am, and I'm sure we all are, for the labor that goes on behind the scenes to push this stuff forward. So thank you.
Yes. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? It is approved. Thank you. We now move on to new business. We have one item on our agenda for new business, which is 2857 Packard Road PUD site plan for city council approval. This evening, our procedure will be for the petitioner to make their presentation. They'll have up to 10 minutes to present the project. We will then move on to our city staff for a report, and then we will open up the public hearing. After we wrap up the public hearing, we will then move on to discussion and a vote. So we will begin with the petitioner presentation.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name's Tom Covert. I'm with Midwestern Consulting. I'm here today with Jim Heisler, the developer of the project from Peters Building Company, and with many members of our design team, including our engineer, our traffic engineer, and our landscape architect. A quick contextual summary of our site location. Our project site is located to the west of Platt and Packard intersection, across from the new Grace Church and Mary Beth Doyle Park. We're on the north side of Packard Road, a bit east of Burr Park, and surrounded by the Greenlee and Kensington Farms neighborhoods. You recall from previous meetings that this site in the master plan is designated as Site 8. Site 8 is recommended for single-family residential development. The project had pursued and achieved conditional rezoning and area plan approval in 2016. There were a number of conditions with that project, and that included a maximum of 52 dwelling units, 4 distinct model homes with the same models not to be built next to each other, a minimum of 5 one-story ranches to be built along the perimeter. Attached garages were not to project further than 12 feet from the front of the house and 6 feet from the porch. and we were providing a 15-foot wide landscape buffer about the perimeter of the property. You'll also recall that the site plan was denied, and with that denial came legal action and further conversation about the project. Through this conversation, we looked to different creative ways to better preserve natural features, better aligning the project with the approved area plan and the conditional rezoning. The revised project, as depicted here in the photo, kind of overlaid on the existing aerial for the site, has 51 units. It has detached single-family lots along the perimeter of the project, along the west, north, and east. There's 25 single-family lots there. It has attached units in the center, or the center block of the site, the core, if you will. It maintains the conditions of the R1E rezoning. It preserves additional areas of natural features in the areas with the asterisks. With this plan, there were no changes to the utility infrastructure layout or easements. The stormwater solution still provides for over-detaining, if you will, of stormwater that would be bypass stormwater. Instead, we're capturing that on site. It continues to have the same access points to Packard, and it continues to have the same home styling. The developer envisions the home character to be consistent with what's depicted in these pictures with two-story and single-story ranches. The proposed planned unit development comparison with the approved area plan. With regard to woodlands, we reduce impacts to the woodlands by 1/10 of an acre. We preserve 208 more inches of landmark trees. We are within 24 inches within 24 inches of achieving the same number of landmark trees that were impacted. We are providing mitigation for those impacts, both on-site and off-site. And with the PUD, as you recall, when we had our pre-petition conference, we had talked about natural features maintenance plan, so that's now included with the PUD plan that's before you. What are the benefits of the PUD? It provides for diverse housing typology for the Ann Arbor market, the attached units being located in a established residential area along a transit corridor. It limits the density of the project and the property. It provides for the better natural features preservation when compared to the site plan, and is in line with what was approved with the rezoning and area plan. Our stormwater management is meeting or exceeding the base stormwater standards in that we are addressing historical flooding issues of adjacent neighborhood properties that are off-site. We're capturing off-site stormwater management and detaining it and infiltrating it on-site. And why would, one of the questions we get a lot is why would we pursue the PUD? And that's for one of the simple facts that we can't attach units in the R1Z with the conditions that are approved on the site. Our goal here tonight is to gain your input on the project, answer any questions that you might have, and respectfully request a recommendation for approval by City Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now head on over to Mr. Chang for a staff report.
I think the petitioner did a good job of covering what the proposal is. But I did want to add a couple of things. In your packets, you'll see a lot of letters from the neighbors, and I tried to answer some of the questions that were brought up. Instead of me trying to paraphrase, I'm just going to read directly from the responses I received from city staff. This one is in regards to a fence that's located on the east property line that is shared, I believe, with the Ward family. The fence has been there since approximately 1960, according to the neighbors. And the response from, as far as the trees go and the mitigation, the site plan was reviewed based on the survey provided. However, whether they are on the 2857 Packard site or the neighbor's property to the east, these trees are being preserved. If the property dispute is resolved and the trees belong to the neighboring property, then the number of landmark trees and woodland trees shown as being on the 2857 Packard site would be reduced, and the number of trees, woodland, and landmark trees preserved would be reduced as well. This would have no impact on the mitigation calculations, as these trees are being preserved and mitigation is not required. It goes on to state that they are staying outside of the critical root zones along this eastern property line, and that the landmark trees will be preserved along with the landscaping. Many of the trees along this fence line are not of high quality or a natural feature, and many are in poor condition. Along some of the other questions that came up was mosquitoes regarding the stormwater detention. So we had a response from our stormwater reviewer that under normal conditions, the proposed detention ponds and infiltration basin are not designed to have standing water in them for long periods of time. This time spans that the ponds are designed to hold water before infiltrated or discharging into the storm sewer are not long enough to promote the growth of mosquito larvae. And then finally, from the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner, regarding the stormwater that's being captured on site, off-site, the rules stipulate that detention must be provided for on-site runoff and any off-site runoff that is directed to the stormwater management system. If the off-site runoff can bypass the development to follow the natural flow paths without greatly changing the existing flow patterns, the rules allow for that. With regard to the northeast basin under the current site layout, the off-site drainage could not bypass the system without changing the flow path and/or concentrating the flow. So it was required to be included in the northeast basin. However, by having the runoff from the northern off-site areas be directed into the northeast basin, the amount of runoff that goes to the eastern adjoining properties will greatly be reduced from current conditions. I also spoke with the Parks Director regarding the existing house on site as possibly being moved to Cobblestone Farm. I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have that in writing. There is no official application that's been submitted for PAC, but he does have concerns regarding who would pay for the cost of moving the house, for the maintenance of the house, where to be located at Cobblestone Farms, the programming. So there's a lot of unanswered questions whether PAC would accept this house to be moved. And I'm open for any questions you may have.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to open up the public hearing. Members of the audience who wish to address the Planning Commission, this is your opportunity to speak to us in regards to this petition. You will have up to 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission. So whoever would like to come up first, just please remember to state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Karen White. I live at 2719 Cranbrook Road, and I've now been here enough that I feel not so nervous talking to you about this. First, the house. I have recently been contacted by the owner, Robert Weber. He is interested in selling the house. He is asking $40,000. I pointed out to Mr. Weber that I had contacted him as part of a historic preservation group back in 2017 when he wouldn't let us see the house. If he had let us see the house then, we could have documented it, and we would probably have plans in place on where to move it to, and we would have funds in place to take care of it. So that's setting that aside. I have been learning the rules for planning. I'm here to play my part. This is citizen participation. This PUD is starting with a very slightly modified version of what many of my neighbors and I consider to be a horrid proposal. It has been justly criticized by planning staff, by the Planning Commission, by residents adjacent to the site, and by City Council. I have shared my concerns starting in December of 2016 with my City Council representatives. I was at the citizen participation meeting in February of 2019. I am not opposed to development. I think there will have to be development on this site, but I don't think we have to accept bad development, and this is too important a site to not get citizen input. If the developers had worked with the citizens and the residents in a meaningful way, I would have had time to document the house, be well on the way to relocating it. I have to wonder if there was deliberate obfuscation. The developer could be breaking ground right now. So if you're already in a hole, I would urge you to stop digging. He is putting forward an unacceptable plan. I think he should work with citizens to put together a good plan.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm sorry, I don't have a sign-in card.
Please state your name and address for the
I am
record.
Pam Gibney. My husband and I live at 2720 Cranbrook Road. We're across the street from the previous person. We are congested now as it is in our subdivision. I know it's not considered a subdivision, but it's easy. Cranbrook, Huron, Chesterfield. We are a subdivision. At one time it had a name. I'm sorry, I don't remember anymore what the name was. We are congested, traffic-wise, very congested. At one point, traffic was directed through our subdivision when they were working on the intersection for Packard and Platt. It was horrendous. People still cut through. There's tons and tons of traffic. We have difficulty getting out onto Packard and the Platt because there are no lights to let us out. There are a lot of us living in that location. This site is very small. I know the map makes it look like it's really big. These houses will not have any property around them. They will be squeezed up against each other. It's not practical. There are too many people they're putting in. There'll be too much traffic. We'll have even a worse time getting out on the Packard and trying to get to work. The traffic is horrendous. I think you should reconsider, and I'll look for the card.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Richard Taylor. I live at 2814 Cranbrook here in Ann Arbor. I did send an email to Chris Cheng, which I believe he forwarded to all of you, and you have with you at this time. So the developer, in the beginning, got the zoning change from R1C, which is all the rest of the neighborhood, to R1E in 2016 based on a not very specific area plan. Numerous references were made at that time to the fact that an area plan is an extremely unusual way to get a zoning change. And I do recall one member of the Planning Commission stating that approval of an area plan did not mean, should not be construed as approval for further plans. The developer now wants a PUD with attached housing, the same congested housing that was previously in the plan. This is completely way out of line, dramatically inconsistent with all of the surrounding housing that's still zoned R1C. Attached housing in this area also sets a very poor precedent for future development. Secondly, from the start in 2016, the developer's plans have reflected a blatant disregard for city guidelines regarding natural features and canopy coverage. The most especially regarding that is the site plan that the City Council did not approve in 2017. That was a reasonable decision. I understand that there's litigation regarding that. I do not think that the Planning Commission should be intimidated by litigation, which in my opinion is completely unfounded. To approve the PUD is like accommodating a person who has just insulted your intelligence. I recall in 2016 that there were numerous references made to the fact that an R1E was necessary for this property because there could be some inclusion of affordable housing. There was talk about it being on a bus line. There was talk about being able to walk to stores. At this present time, with the PUD, the developer has no intention of including affordable housing. The other matters that are of concern here is as outlined in my email, there are serious issues regarding the developer's take on the correct boundaries for this property. I think those need to be clarified before there's any decision made. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
little hip and it doesn't work too well some days. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but I was doing a pneumonia thing, and that didn't allow for me to come here. My name is Patrick Delaney, and I live at 2804 Cranbrook Road. And the things that concern me about this new plan with the 15-foot offset, or whatever you want to call it, is the grade on the offset, if you look at a big drawing, dumps at least a third of the angle back into our yards. And it goes clear back up to the pond. The other thing is that the very, very large trees, I have 3 trees behind my garage, well, actually one's beside the garage, that drop limbs in my house, my property. And if the big tree, which hasn't been cared for, drops a very large limb, it is going to wipe out my garage and a couple of collectible cars inside it. And the 15-foot offset obscures, in my mind, who is responsible for those trees. They're on their property, but with that 15-foot offset, unless there's a better explanation than I've been able to find so far, that 15-foot offset just obscures their responsibility to the neighbors, the existing neighbors, and that's of great concern to me. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Somebody's glasses are here.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Katherine Angstrom. I'm at 2618 Easy Street. So, I have a few notes, sorry, because I forget. Sorry, I haven't been to a few of these. I'm a student and I have 2 kids under 3, so it's just chaos. So, I am begging you to reconsider this plan. Single-family homes are just not the way of the future. We need something that is even slightly representative of affordable housing. We need it now. I have friends being priced out of their rentals. I have friends being priced out of their neighborhoods. Our neighborhood, something that I love since I've moved here, is that it is somewhat quote-unquote affordable. And we're going to lose the way if we turn this into cookie-cutter single-family homes. This plan doesn't seem sustainable, and I think that Ann Arbor is a good enough city and a strong enough city to be the example and to lead the way for green development in the future. And I think we desperately need to stand up for that. Okay, thank you. And I think that this site should be developed. I just think we should absolutely do everything that we can to make sure this is good for everyone, not just the people that can afford $500K for a house. That's not everyone in this city. So thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Darcy Hannah. I live at 2725 Radcliffe, and I've heard quite a few points I agree with. It's very difficult getting out of the neighborhood that I'm in, which is east of what this is, especially rush hour, getting out on Packard or getting out on Platt. Is very difficult and almost is dangerous on Platt. I too am dismayed that there's not affordable housing in this, dismayed that you will be removing bur oak trees. The deer population in this 8 acres is going to be displaced. They'll probably be running through our neighborhood, which they already are now. We get deer all the time, big deer, bucks, running through our neighborhood. I haven't heard how many deer are on this 8 acres, but I imagine there's quite a few. I also don't like hearing about a historical home being destroyed.
And I think this development is way too packed with the housing too close together. I don't like the layout at all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Sue Symington. I'm at 2649 Carmel, and I've been coming to these meetings since the get-go. And I agree with everything everybody has said here tonight, and I understand about development, and we need to keep the city moving forward. I've been in this southeast Ann Arbor for over 3 decades, and I've been out on Ellsworth, I've been over off Stone, and now I'm here on Carmel. And it's just growing and growing and growing, and for years and years and years, this area was considered, you mentioned to somebody, oh, I live at Packard and Platt, and they were like, oh, Packard and Platt. Now I guess it's the place to be in town. And I agree with everybody, development most likely will happen. I just feel this is too dense. I looked at the city planning, you're talking about renewable materials, I don't see that in this plan. And one addition that nobody has talked about, and if you've ever been on Packard Road anywhere from 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning, I keep thinking about school children. We don't have sidewalks on Carmel, but Easy just got some. School children leaving that complex, walking along Packard when cars are flying by at 50, 60 miles an hour. I'm an adult, and it frightens me. I can't imagine. Are we going to be talking about this with the schools? Are we going to hire crossing guards? I mean, what's going to happen? So that's something that I haven't heard, but I concur with everything all my neighbors have said. And that's all I've got to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Ron Lev, 2645 Easy Street. I live about 3 houses away from the planned development. I've got 3 points. The first one is the biggest one. This development appears to be very ill-conceived. It's unlike what's stated in the proposer's plans. It is not financially accessible, certainly not relative to the rest of the neighborhood. It is a de facto gentrification relative to the neighborhood. It's out of character in a detrimental way to the feeling and overall ambiance of the neighborhood, and it represents a very severe impact to the trees on the site. The houses in the neighborhood are in the low 1,000 square feet. The bulk of the houses in the development will be 2,000 square feet. The houses in the neighborhood are, for the most part, $200,000 to $250,000, which is not cheap, but it's an entryway into Ann Arbor. The development is $350,000 to $450,000. It's a whole other social class and social category. Most of the houses in the neighborhood are ranches. This will be 2-story houses that will stick out dramatically from the overall look and feel of the neighborhood. And finally, the density. Most of these small ranch houses in the neighborhood are on medium, large lots. Here you're squeezing in 51 units into 7 acres. There'll be medium, bloated houses in a small, dense environment. So it feels like it's going to stick out like a sore thumb and not a pleasant one. I don't know if there's a pleasant sore thumb. Tree impact, even with the PUD, they're leaving 1/4 of the woodland trees. They're leaving 1/3 of the landmark trees, but only 1/7 of those are being retained without impact to their critical root damage. Those are the numbers in the proposal we just saw. So that's the other part. So fundamentally, I know you're here to consider whether to grant the PUD, but I believe, as many of the residents have expressed, that the transition from R1C to R1E was a mistake. It was justified as economic viability of the property, but the actual price of the owner to the developer has not been disclosed. It hasn't been transparent. The city does not owe an owner of property the maximum value they could possibly get from their property, and rezoning to accommodate that. So I believe that we need to reconsider this from the ground up, not just a PUD. Reconsider rezoning to R1C, which Brett in a recent educational session explained was a possibility, perhaps a difficult one, and step back and look at this from the beginning. That's the first point, big picture. Secondly, one of the negotiation points that have been brought up frequently is, including by the developers themselves, is the owner could do clear cutting of the entire property because it's a single family home. we need to find a way to move around that loophole, to make sure that if a single-family homeowner is intending to do a multi-unit development, they can't do a clear cut and then proceed. How to do that, there are creative ways. I'm certainly not in my 15 seconds, but that needs to be addressed because it's a loophole. The creative thinking can at least mitigate or deter, as opposed to it being a bargaining chip of the developer to say, hey, we could just do it all. Last point is, please delay your decision and recommendation. What you're seeing here is a fraction of the negative input that's been heard. We've only gotten educated 10 days ago by Brett and Alex. Give us a little more time to coalesce the opinion of the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a little different opinion than those previously, perhaps. My name's Eileen. I live at 288 Easy Street, or 2889 Easy Street, so I back right up to some of those really big, gorgeous trees. That's my passion. That property, the new plan, I actually like the density of the center. I support the PUD just because it gives more flexibility. What I don't like is the density in general. So, I am opposed to landmark trees 57 and 38 being removed. If we could somehow tweak that plan a little bit, that would be great. I have a little figure here from the American Forest that says one tree can intercept 760 gallons of rainwater in its crown. So the more trees, the better. I am concerned about children going to school, about traffic, but my main thing is save the damn trees.
Thank you.
Hello to all. My name is Dan Billich. I live at 2719 Cranbrook. Have a few points to make. First, and way too briefly, about the house, which deserves a huge amount of talk because it's been there for longer than we have. It should be considered a feature of this property and not a bug. I'd like to propose a development where we keep the house there and we have the architecture be inspired by it. Mallett's Creek Settlement. It's beautiful. It's part of Ann Arbor. It's part of our history. Look at this thing. I used to drive for AATA for 18 years. Traffic is horrible. It's dangerous with the kids there. The kids are going to have to walk across the street at Easy Street and Packard if you should go ahead and build something there. Dangerous, bad. Trying to get out of the place onto Packard, ridiculous. Try to get out of Chesterfield onto Packard, you have a wider deal. You're trying to make a left turn onto Packard, and you got 3 people waiting behind you. Oh my God, I better go fast. What if there's kids trying to cross in front of you because they're coming home from school? Okay. PUD is supposed to be a benefit to the city. I don't see a benefit to the city. What's the benefit? I'd like to build a roller derby on my lot. I got a secret offer from a developer, and if you just give me a variance, you help me make some money. Well, it shouldn't work that way. Nobody deserves, if the property cannot be developed profitably within the laws of the city, then maybe the pricing's off. Maybe there's something wrong with the economic model here. That's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes?
My apologies for coming here late. My name is James Demore. I am not a direct neighbor of this project. However, I live a couple blocks over at 2771 Maplewood Avenue. And as many of you know, I'm very familiar with the planning processes of this city. So I'm sorry if I missed several of the other comments that were made here, so forgive me if they seem repetitive. Just a couple points and just looking at this process and being somewhat familiar with it. I'm a little troubled. This is something you can't address tonight, but something that I've seen observing planning issues for many years, and that is you have the role of policymakers. You're the ones that make the decisions. And yes, you rely on a professional city staff to make those policy recommendations. And by and large, what I've seen, you have a tremendous city staff at your disposal. And I thank them for all the service that they have done. But one of the things I've always thought, for something as important as this is something that should not be held to a staff recommendation. I think the ordinance revision is in order so that staff is not burdened with that. That is something that all of you need to make. And each of you either have a great interest, if not a professional background to that. You know the right decisions to make, and you can do your best instinct. You give it your best shot. That's something that needs to be done. It's not germane. You can't take care of that tonight, but that's something you need to move forward with the Ordinance Revisions Committee. Secondly, as discussed before by a previous speaker, if we are going to go with a planned unit development project, the benefit, the threshold of that benefit must be extremely high. How green is this? Is this a totally green project? Because they have a community level energy projects that are there. Lastly, something that I'm rather angered about, and that is I don't like the idea of a city being blackmailed. This project has been before you in the various forms before you, and I don't recall if this body denied it, but I know certainly council denied it. It went through the process on the basis of natural features. And just because a developer says, or there's allegations that are made, I do not know. I have an open mind with respect to this project that says, if you don't do this, we will cut down the trees and we'll sue you anyway. That is a terrible way to do business. What you need to do is go on the merits of this project, and the benefits of this project moving forward must be very, very high. If not, stand your ground and recommend denial to this project. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission?
Hi, my name is Patricia Sontag. I live at 2741 Beacon Hill. My main concern is the water and where it's going to go. The detention areas concern me. We are having our mains repaired in this neighborhood, so I live on the other side, but we don't have basements for a reason on Beacon Hill because the water table is high. If you can fix the water table and the way the grading is slanted so that the neighbors are not washed out and have a water or pond in their backyard, I think this could be a workable situation. I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and I will read the two motions before us this evening. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Weber rezoning petition from R1E Single Family Residential with conditions to PUD Plan Unit Development District and supplemental regulations. Motion number 2, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Weber PUD Site Plan and Development Agreement conditioned upon submission of an ecological maintenance plan for the natural features be submitted and approved by the city. Do I have a commissioner that will move both of those? Moved by Commissioner Gibrandel, seconded by Commissioner Mills. And we will start with discussion. We'll go to Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the residents who have been engaged in this for 2.5, 3 years now. It's been quite the process. Thanks to city staff for your diligence throughout all of this. There have been a number of staff reports. None of them are duplicates of the last. This has been a lot of unique work and a lot of thorough analysis. I think there was a good summary of how we got here, both on the part of the developer, on the part of staff, and on the part of residents. So the first part of what I wanted to talk about, I think, has been covered. I think the major key difference of where we are right now is that the lawsuit, I should say, when the developer sued the city, it has been stayed, and here we are. And I think that context is important. As a member of city council, I'm privy to some privileged and confidential information that other people aren't, and I'm in an uncomfortable and awkward position, and I just want to get that out there. So I'm going to do my best to talk about the merits or the lack of merits of this specific project, but without mentioning the fact that there's legal context around this would be a failure. I think as we go through this round of revisions to the site plan, there are kind of 4 primary goals that I'd identified based on the themes I hear from constituents. The first is decrease the impact on natural features. That's not only something we hear from constituents, but is something that the petitioner is legally obligated to do because the last proposal was denied based on the fact it didn't meet our zoning requirements with respect to preserving natural features, namely trees. The next is improving the stormwater management situation, that is the flooding situation in the area. The third is decrease the impact on neighbors, and when I say that, I mean the massing of the buildings, their relative location to neighbors' houses, the traffic, and then demographic changes. I've heard from two very thoughtful notes from constituents around what are the impacts of new construction to the housing market in the area. And then the final was the farmhouse. And I wanted to check in on that since our last citizen participation meeting in April, and thank you, Karen, for the update. I drafted an email to you that I'll send when the meeting's over while you were speaking to follow up on that. I guess I want to start with those goals in order and really tackle the first 3 because the farmhouse sounds like there's some conversation we have to have offline. But decreasing the impact on natural features, particularly trees. So from what I understand, this saves an additional 37 woodland trees, which are trees under 6 inches in diameter, and 5 landmark trees, which would be over the 6 inches. I just wanted to, I guess a clerical question. I'm a little confused by the math in the table on page 3 of the staff report. I'm having a hard time getting the numbers to add up, and I just want to make sure that I'm working off of a fully accurate picture of what the situation was with the trees. So we have currently 57 landmark trees, and then under this PUD, I see that 38 trees are slated for removal, and that there would be a preservation of an additional 13, which is different than the number referenced earlier, and I believe different than what the presentation from the developer was. I'm trying to better reconcile those numbers. So I think so page 2 of the staff report says 5 additional landmark trees will be preserved, and then it looks like it would be 13 trees on the table on page 3, and then in the developer's presentation, it looked like there would be actually fewer trees preserved. So I just want to make sure that, I could very well be confused, but I just want to make sure we're working off the same numbers.
If I'm understanding, I know it's 43 according to the chart that was previous, and 57, and that comes up with the 13 if I'm just, these may not be landmark, they're in that column.
Well, so there's a row for woodland trees, so under 6 inches, a row for woodland, row for landmark. And there's a column, these 2 white columns would be for the current PUD, and then the 2 dark columns would be for the site plan that was denied.
Correct.
And so I'm seeing, I guess, it'd be, so in the denied site plan, 7 landmark trees would be preserved, which still only gets you to, right, but these don't add up to 57, and these don't add up to 57. And similarly, this is a number of 13, but on page 2 it says 5, and the developer said that we're actually decreasing the number of preserved trees.
This may take me a second. So
Okay.
I'm gonna continue
Yeah,
on
no,
and
certainly.
figure out the numbers I did right.
Sorry, and I could have sent those in earlier. It caught my eye a little too late. So I mean, I want to make sure we're working off the right number of trees. I think that's really important calculus as we make this decision because trees were the factor. The next piece, I want to just comment on a benefit that a lot of these trees being saved are bur oaks, which represent some of the oldest forest fragment that survives in the city. That's good. The wind is small, but we're faced with an uncomfortable situation that's been characterized as blackmail. Not put that aspersion onto the developer, but it's the situation we're in. I also wanted to follow up on landmark trees 37 and 58. That was the first I had heard those referenced specifically, was in the public comment here. I just wanted to get a sense of what those trees are, where they are, and what we could potentially do to bridge that gap. So I guess those are my tree-related questions. I don't know if we want to take a pause on trees and move to a different subject while we're doing some review.
I think it'd be helpful to have the developer. Excuse me, ma'am. Sorry. This is for our discussion at this time. Yeah. Maybe if the development team can show us on a map of where number 37, 58 are located. (37) and 58, and if you can step up to the podium when you have that information. (57) and 38, is that right? Yeah, 57,
The
38.
trees that we identified have tag numbers that are 4 digits. I think it was mentioned by one of our neighbors that it was the trees. If she wants to look at the map and show us where those trees are, or where she identified 57 and 37, that would be helpful.
It's on page 3 of the planning commission under number of trees. Request for landmark trees.
So that 57 and 58 is the number of trees.
57, 38.
Those aren't trees specific, but the trees that we anticipate preserving at the site, if you look at the map that's up here, or maybe on your screen in front of you, generally speaking, with the revised layout, we created open space areas along the western property line by connecting the buildings or the units interior to that block, and then that allowed us to create the west open space areas, and then the open space area at the southeast near the entrance to the development. And then it also, by attaching the units, allowed us to preserve trees between the backs of the units that are attached in that central block. So that's generally there where trees are being preserved, and then there's also trees around the site in that 15-foot buffer area that are being preserved as well. So if I could expand a little bit more to what was mentioned, I can have Tina get into the numbers for you of trees, but there's something that that chart does. The chart that Commissioner Ackerman's looking at compares our proposed PUD to the denied site plan. And the chart and numbers that we were using compares the approved area plan to the proposed PUD plan. So there are some number differences. Further, my understanding, and Tina can correct this, is that the chart you're looking at includes all the trees that were surveyed and not necessarily all the trees that meet the requirements for regulation by the city or are even on our property. There may be trees in that table that we identified and located that are just off the property line, but within that area that we need to study when we provide a site plan. So I think some of the numbers in that are difficult to understand when you compare them to the calculations on our site plan. So our tree mapping looks at the trees that meet the requirements of a landmark tree, a woodland tree. We categorize them that way, and then we also look at the trees that are on our site, as opposed to all trees that are greater than 6 inches per se.
Okay, so the staff report is comparing apples to oranges, your presentation was comparing apples to bananas?
Sure.
Okay. All right, I still want to return to the numbers just because I want to really shore up exactly what the situation is on the ground, or would be on the ground. But while we take a pause there, I want to turn my attention to stormwater. So we have neighbors of the property that are flooding, that, face flooding, especially on the Cranbrook to the northeast and then running through to, streets like Beacon Hill. Can you walk us through the stormwater plan? As I understand it, it's now your objective and plan to store water beyond that which is created on your site or caught on your site, and also some from adjacent properties. Can you talk us through what that benefit actually translates into, both in numbers and kind of lived experience of the neighbors?
Yep, so currently, we provide a stormwater management system which meets the requirements of the county stormwater management policies and guidelines and includes infiltration of stormwater. We have 3 basins, 2 of which are along Packard Road, and then one that is at the northeast corner of the project site. All of these detention basins have the opportunity to provide infiltration to the groundwater, and they also have an opportunity to provide piped outlet to Packard Road Stormwater Management System, which has capacity to address the stormwater from the proposed development. The existing conditions at the site are that it's sloped from the west to the east, slightly northwest to southeast, and there's water that comes from the, let's say, Carmel Street and Easy Street homes lots, because they were developed at a different time, so they weren't necessarily required to pick up stormwater and convey it to a stormwater system. So that rainwater, surface water hits the surface, it flows through their lots, through our site, and what has been described to us as a pond or ponding that exists to a number of the lots, maybe 4 or 5 lots along Cranbrook Road in their backyard. So what we're doing is, one of the things you can provide with a development is you can bypass that off-site stormwater. That's perfectly acceptable. You heard Chris explain that to everybody. We can bypass that stormwater, or we can take that stormwater on and deal with it in our project or with a project. So what we're proposing to do is take that stormwater, and it's roughly 1.3 acres along Easy Street and 1.26 acres kind of along Carmel and the north property adjacent to us. We're taking that 2.6 acres roughly, and we're going to collect it in our stormwater system through pipes and ditches and swales, and we're going to detain it and then release it either into the groundwater through infiltration or out to Packard Road, depending on the size of the rain event.
So to translate that, water that comes on Easy Street that currently moves across your site and pools into the backyards on Cranbrook will now be stopped if this proposal were to be built. It would be stopped on your site.
Correct. We'd be addressing it on our site.
What level of confidence would this proposal stop pooling from happening in your backyard?
Very high level of confidence, because our basin is also going to become the lowest point when compared to the neighboring properties. Mhm.
All right, I want to turn then to the impact on neighbors and trying to, respect massing, physical interaction, traffic, and demographic things. With respect to massing, it's part lifestyle homes along the outer ring. Are those still captured?
That's correct.
in 2D? Okay. The 15-foot land use
That's
buffer?
correct.
Okay, so still a 15-foot buffer between any construction and the property line. When it comes to, so some of this proposal says, we're gonna tear down a lot of trees, but we're gonna plant 577 inches of trees along the perimeter to provide screening to neighboring properties. Can you give us a sense, and maybe this is a better question? Oh, my microphone has been off, I apologize. So the 577 inches of trees that are proposed to be planted along the property line to act as screening to existing neighbors, can you give us a sense of, I guess, how many trees that is, what kind of species, what kind of screening that's going to actually provide, especially, year 1 all the way to year 5 to year 15 of this development? It's a bunch of saplings. Obviously, that provides a lot less screening to neighbors than, a full evergreen.
I'm sorry to speak out of turn. Could you please put the landscape plan up, Mr. Tang, so that we can be referring to that, so it's not just a verbal description, but it actually...
I don't have I don't have a mouse in front of me, Tina. Could you toggle that forward or backwards to a landscape plan? I've also got rolled plans, if we want to distribute plans in front of you. I got 4 sets of plans we could look at also.
So
I'm not sure there's a
we don't
landscape
have
plan
the
on that.
landscape plan in our presentation. Is it?
Thank you, Commissioner Gibrandal. When we turn attention to trees, you are welcome to speak out of turn anytime. Commissioner Gibrandal is our resident landscape architect. It's quite the encyclopedia on fauna species.
Do you want me to? I don't know that there's a landscape. There's not a
Flora
landscape plan in our
species.
presentation.
Got
I don't know if they have the site plans in general. So my name is Tina Fix. I'm a landscape architect with Midwestern Consulting. In general, the trees that are along the edges of the property are a mix of both deciduous and evergreen trees that are being proposed. The intention for the higher number of evergreen trees is to provide you that screening that you're talking about, and then also to have the deciduous trees along the edges to promote the canopy growth as it gets a little bit farther along, and then also to be more compatible with some of the trees that are being removed right now. So as far as species that are along the edges, another challenge that we have out there is that the western property line, the northern property line, and half of the eastern property line all have overhead utility lines along the edges of the property. So species that were picked, we tried to keep them relatively small so that they're not being cut down by DTE in the future. So a couple of the evergreen species that we have there's white spruce, there's some arborvitae in a few select areas, and then Black Hill spruce, which is a more dense kind of cousin, I guess you could say, to the white spruce, but it doesn't get quite as tall or quite as large. And so that helps with the overhead utility lines. And then the deciduous species that are being proposed, there's a few larger canopy trees, but there's a decent number that are slightly smaller, so they're kind of the American hornbeam, and I'm just looking through here as I'm talking, the red bud, which is a smaller tree, and I believe, give me one second, some serviceberry, that those are, I wouldn't say that those are large canopy trees, those are more understory trees, size-wise, so they're only going to get probably 20 feet tall, maybe only 15 to 20 feet wide. So those are blocking kind of that lower view. There are a few higher canopy trees, but those are more centralized around the detention basins where they've got more space to grow and not be in conflict with the utility lines.
Okay, so that's very helpful. I guess knowing now that canopy's going to be more or less 20 feet a lot of places. What's the change in elevation between the neighbors on Cranbrook, the neighbors on Easy, and then the proposed two-story homes?
So
I got to orient my, Easy Street is the one to the west. That grading, there's not as much grade change as there is to the north and to the east. The grading that you show on there assumes a certain amount of view out or walkout built houses. So that grading there isn't necessarily, that's kind of the grading that it would be at the time of construction, and then as the houses get built, you would be modifying the grading on each specific lot, depending on what type of house is being built there.
Okay.
And I can definitely have, our engineer speak to that a little bit more in detail if you want to get more detailed on that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to assess, the degree that this is going to actually provide.
Oh, the
some
tree height
screening.
versus the grading?
Right, exactly.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So what's the angle from which neighbors on Cranbrook or Easy would be looking down or up at the houses, and does a 20-foot tree protect that view shed and privacy?
Right. Were you able to stare at that longer than I was?
If I can have you scroll to sheet 10, there's a couple of cross-sections of the site. Generally speaking, our neighboring properties sit within 2, 3, 4 feet finished grade to where we're going to be for our finished grade. But sheet 10, if you scroll, well, that's section AA is north and south, and section BB is east and west across the site. One of the things we try to do with our site also through the grading process is we do have detention basins to excavate soil out of, and our goal was to have a balanced site here so that we're not trunking a bunch of soil off-site. So with our project, we're going to be placing those soils that we remove for our detention basins on our site, which then gives us the opportunity to have view-out type basements in a lot of these lots and buildings.
All right. Do you have follow-up? I mean, if this is a time to talk about the landscaping, by all
Sure.
means.
It's helpful to hear about the utility lines, because that was one of my questions there, too. It seems pretty dense to me, actually, in terms of the buffer that's created there, in terms of how they're planting it. I would respectfully suggest you change to western red cedar, since there are a lot of deer here, and the eastern red cedar is like candy to them. So in terms of being able to prevent issues in the future, you might consider doing that. And then just, planting the big trees where you can, I guess, because you are so limited on the edges. And so I hear you around the detention basin and things like that, to be able to make sure you're maxing out the canopy, the bigger canopy, where you're able to. Is the 15-foot buffer required as part of, since you're residential against residential, or is that's something that's additional? Yeah.
So that was one of the conditions that was offered with the conditional rezoning to R1E, was this 15-foot landscape buffer.
That's right.
And in the spirit of that conditional rezoning, we're just maintaining that in the PUD version. But
Got it.
it's not a conflicting land use buffer per ordinance.
Yeah. I guess one other piece in regards to stormwater, since we were also talking about that too, is I've worked on several places in this neighborhood, and groundwater is just a huge issue. And so if there are basements here, I'm assuming you're going to have sump pumps in them. And how does that kind of constant source of water interface with your stormwater in terms of where it's going, how it's being outletted? I'm assuming it would go into your stormwater system. And does that affect your calculations in terms of volumes and things like that? I mean, after a spring like this that we've all seen, there's just been huge amount of water that all of us are living with in ways that I don't think many of us have seen before. So I'm just wondering how that interfaces with your stormwater in terms of because I don't think there's a lot of basements in this neighborhood for a reason, because it was, I think, once upon a time, there was a lot of wetland here, it got filled in, and things like that. So obviously, there's the old part where the old house is, but I'm just wondering if you all have anticipated the sump water that will likely happen once you dig the basements here.
Yep, so there's, the simple answer is yes. We are providing for our sumps to connect to our stormwater system via pipe, as opposed to surface water flow. We would convey that water to the stormwater basins, and that water would have the opportunity to infiltrate or, depending on volume, move on through the pipes. One of the things with building up the site a little bit, from the excavation of soils from the stormwater, is we get to sit our buildings a little higher than what they are on the surrounding sites, which gives us an advantage to better address our basement floors to those groundwater depths.
I still think you're going to run into it, but I'm glad to
Seasonally-
know where it's going. And-
Seasonally, I think we will have sump pumps running to address some of those seasonal
Yeah,
flows.
and when
Yep.
you did your soil borings for this, what season was it when you all did that in terms of getting your groundwater information?
We conducted, I think, 3 explorations, and I'll get the dates for you here in 2 minutes.
If your system has been sized to be able to handle it, that's the important thing. It's more just understanding that, I think this is just going to be the reality there, and making sure the development is set up to be able to handle that, not as a like, oh geez, we're so surprised by this, but that it's part and parcel of how you're designing how to manage it so that any basements wouldn't flood.
While they're staring at the dates, I'm going to tell you the dates on the soil borings were June of 2015, June, January, and then I believe July is the last one, right?
Okay,
So 2 different seasons.
okay.
Yep, that's what our engineer was confirming. The other thing with that is the sandy soils also infiltrate beyond what the stormwater standards would allow, meaning they're really good infiltration. So we just can't take that benefit through the stormwater calculations. So that water that would seasonally be there would likely infiltrate in our basin.
Where are the sandy soils?
Roughly speaking, everywhere we have detention basins,
Yeah.
and then the sandy soil continues kind of going to the northwest.
Because generally speaking,
There's
it's
clay on top
super
of
heavy
it.
clay. Yeah, right. So you're basically digging down to be able to connect
Correct.
to sand seams that are there.
Sand seams that are there and above the groundwater that we've observed.
Right.
yeah.
Okay. All righty. I will pivot back to Mr. Ackerman. Thank you for letting me hijack your line of questioning.
No, it was very appreciated. All right, moving to traffic. This isn't an item that was covered in the staff report. It's something that we discussed at length in 2016 and 2017. Could we just get a sense of traffic studies that have been conducted and what the findings were? I'd look to staff and the developer, I suppose.
Mike Cole, Midwestern Consulting. I did the traffic study back in 2016 for this, and it has been, updated with a slightly different housing model, and the kind of the densification and housing type dropped the number of trips below 50. So, as I understand it, there wasn't a need for an additional further traffic study. Conditions at the driveway, like everyone has already said, it's difficult to turn out onto Packard, and that would be the case for this driveway as well. In terms of impacts to other intersections, not a significant amount, just because the number of units is fairly small, so.
Okay. And what are the movements allowed at the intersection?
Full movements
So-
at the driveway.
So you'd have a
Left turn
turn
in.
in, you have a left turn and a right turn lane?
Yep, left turns cause the most delay outbound, yeah.
Okay. What, have you explored any of the impacts of the crosswalks in the area in terms of the left turn?
There's no crosswalk at the church as far as I understand it.
There's, bear with me, I can return to that one, but, okay. Any addition of traffic is gonna be felt by the neighbors. I appreciate that this, in the grand scheme of the southeast side of town, is small, but it's a change, and that change has to be weighed. So thank you. I guess moving to the demographics, I guess, when does a PUD call for the inclusion of affordable housing? When is that a required public benefit?
It's required when the proposed density exceeds the number of units allowed by the base zoning.
Got it. And since this is at par with the number of units, it doesn't.
This request is not asking for a higher density than the base zoning district permits.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, I don't, there isn't a great answer on how new construction does or doesn't affect the housing market in Ann Arbor. In the state of Michigan, we're limited in our ability to require affordable housing. Rezoning to a PUD is an opportunity, but when the ordinance asks for it, I do think that the R1E or this type of housing is going to be a more affordable price point than R1C would have been. You know, you're talking the difference between a 4,000 and 7,000 square foot home, which R1C provides, and a 2,000 square foot home, which this provides. That's small consolation when you're seeing, an 80% increase in the houses of new construction compared to your own. I understand that. And I think that if we did have the ability to say new development had to have affordable housing, we would jump on that opportunity, but it's a function of state law. And it's a function of living in a state with a fairly conservative legislature. As we weigh all of this, it's hard. I guess I want some firm facts on what the tree counts really are. I mean, that's what brought us to a lawsuit. That's what brought us to today, was the hang up in the number of trees, and without firm understanding of what that is, it's really hard to weigh anything else in balance. So I guess that'll leave my thoughts and questions for now. But this is improved over what City Council and this commission denied in the fall of 2017. But on balance, it's still not clear.
Commissioner Woods.
I wanted to just go back briefly to the question about trees. And the question I have is one which was mentioned by one of our speakers. I believe it was a Mr. Delaney. And he, I believe, indicated that his property is on Cranbrook. And the way it was described was the fact that there is even with the 15-foot offset, perhaps the crowns of the larger trees in that area are going to possibly fall on his property. I think, if I'm getting the sense of that right. So I guess this is a question for staff, and it's also a question perhaps for the petitioner. Who is responsible for those trees should big branches or what have you fall onto the neighboring property? I understand we have a big enough, we're trying to have that space so that perhaps that can keep those kinds of situations from happening, but if the crown is big enough and the trees are big enough, there could be issues. So I don't know if the petitioner wants to answer that question or if staff knows.
Well, generally speaking, one of the benefits of this arrangement, and particularly the 15-foot, is that it would be memorializing the requirement to plant and maintain those trees for site plan compliance. That's a distinction from those trees being located on individual lots without an appurtenant restriction in that regard. For the vast majority of properties, as referenced during public comment, there are no restrictions for removal of vegetation, be it landmark or woodlands or anything else. And so, generally speaking, I would anticipate this property probably results in a condominium arrangement of some sort. There's probably going to be a condominium association associated with that. That association would determine the specific burden of maintenance of trees in those areas. But to an extent, from the city lens, it doesn't matter. By memorializing those trees on the site plan, the property was going to have to maintain them to be compliant. So, so it's probably a better, this type of plan provides more assurance that they will be maintained, and gives the city some leverage to say that if a tree is not maintained, then it's in violation of the site plan and corrective action, enforcement action can be taken. But that's as far as probably staff can address it. If the property owner knew more specifics of how that arrangement might happen, they could potentially respond to it. But again, from a site plan perspective, they will have to be maintained regardless of how that responsibility is divvied amongst a condo association or individual owners.
Okay. Did you have a comment?
If I could, there will be a homeowners association. This will be a site condo. The individual unit owners or lot owners will be responsible as the first person or responsible party to replace trees or maintain trees on their lot. If it is not maintained in the proper fashion, then the homeowners association would have the opportunity to replant or maintain the trees that would be on those lots.
So this is a little bit, so this is a homeowners association as opposed to a condo association? Because is the property owned by everyone who lives in the area, or is it individually, the lots are individually owned?
The units, the homes, will be owned by individuals, and they're part of a condominium that would have a homeowners association, which would have, that each of the units would be a part of.
Okay. I'm just trying to look forward, since the question was here, and in terms of the gentleman, it sounds like on one hand we're saying you'll be able to contact this homeowners association, or would it be the individual homeowner that he would
If
be
I were a neighbor and
contacting?
I had issues with trees or trees being maintained, I would talk to the neighbor and probably the homeowners association. There's two lines to get to the person responsible for that.
Okay.
And if I could just mention real quickly, I think one of the charts on sheet 27, which compares the alternative analysis across the different project plans and analysis, kind of gets at what Zach was talking about comparing those trees with the PUD versus the area plan versus the site plan. So if you wanted to take a look at that sheet. Yep, and there's a summary calculation on a previous sheet to that.
And then I have a similar kind of a question in terms of the maintenance of the water and the sewage and the water that's coming across the property. And, you know, the public benefit, as you've indicated, is the fact that you're going to be taking in some of the water that would previously perhaps have caused some issues in the surrounding properties, and now you're going to be sort of gathering it all up and helping it to get to our storm water system. So who maintains that? Because we're assuming that infrastructure will be great, but if something happens and it's got to be fixed, who
Yep.
pays
So
for that?
our stormwater system is a private system outletting to the public system in Packard Road. So our private system would have a drainage district associated with it, and it would be a responsibility of the homeowners association. Then the county, through the drainage district, would take care of anything that didn't get resolved.
Okay. So the interesting thing seems to be that with this particular PUD, the actual folks who end up paying for this PUD will be the future homeowners, as opposed to the developer. Is that accurate, or have I kind of simplified it?
I'm sorry, Mr. Heisler was reminding me that the county will, a part of The agreement is that the county would be reviewing the stormwater system annually to make sure that it's up to par with what was approved. And I think your statement was that, are the people that buy into this PUD going to then be responsible for maintaining that system? That is correct, through the homeowners association.
Okay.
There'll be a fee to that association for things, road maintenance, sidewalks, snow plowing, those types of things.
Okay. And so does that then increase that price point that someone mentioned earlier in terms of what these units are going to be costing? Or is that all built into, what was the figure someone said? 500,000 or something like that? Okay.
I can say the, oh, this one? All right.
And
And say the
wouldn't
figure
mind-
500,000 is totally erroneous.
If you wouldn't mind
Oh,
introducing
sure,
yourself.
Jim Heisler, Peters Building developer or petitioner. Yeah, the 500,000, could someone pay that much for it? I guess, but that's not what we believe they will sell for
Okay.
at this point. I don't know where that number came from.
What do you believe they'll sell for?
They will go somewhere between 350 to 450, which was the number someone else stated, which is the one I've stated publicly.
Okay.
As far as how the ongoing maintenance affects the price, it affects the package, but usually they'll be competitive or similar to other areas with similar restrictions and similar requirements. Obviously, the more requirements, the more costs. This one has some pretty stringent ones on trees and stormwater and that type of thing. I think the stormwater will be a little better than most people think because there is a fair amount of sand, which will help. Very good sand and a good portion of it. It's capped by clay, but underneath it'll be pretty good. The trees and how you maintain those and the perpetuity of some of this will be an ongoing expense that they have to plan for as an association so it doesn't become a burden, because that affects the value of a house. If there is a deferred maintenance or deferred fee that everybody thinks might come up. So we will be pretty diligent, working with the arborist and the landscape architects on how much this will cost, and it'll be there. To answer what that price is today, I do not know, but we've done about 20 of these type of developments. We'll work down through it, and we obviously want to sell them, and it's got to be competitive for similar developments.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for me.
Commissioner Trudeau.
I have a few things to say, but my biggest question, which is keyed a little bit by this memo we received today from the Parks Department and the Natural Area Preservation Department with a bunch of questions about the maintenance plan, and that's sort of the general gist of my concern is we have these trees, especially I think the bur oaks and some of the really impressive forest fragment trees that are native to the region. And I think at our work session, Commissioner Gibrandal actually made a really strong and convincing case that really having a plan to protect those and allow those to regenerate would be a real benefit above and beyond just counting trees. And really thinking about what the species are and how we're protecting them. And so I'm wondering, one, if we can talk a little bit more about what that plan looks like right now, and how confident we can be that those trees, especially those components of the original native forest fragment are going to be maintained in a way over the long term that we can actually realize that benefit.
So the natural features maintenance plan was added to the last sheet of the site plan, and I'm not sure which natural areas preservation memo you received today. The last one I got, I want to say, was maybe a week and a half ago. Is it the forestry one? Okay, I'm going to come back to that because I need to read that a little bit more. In general, the way this maintenance plan language is set out is the first section of it talks about the responsibility, who's responsible at different times for implementing this maintenance plan and continuing it on. So at the pre-construction and construction stage, it's really on the owner and the developer to follow through with those. And then as the property gets handed over to the homeowners association, the responsibilities in turn over to the individual owners on the site and the homeowners association to kind of follow through if there's difficulty with the owners. So that's what's outlined in that responsibility section of this maintenance plan. In the pre-construction section of it, that is really going into doing site assessment out there to figure out the condition of the trees before construction starts, just because we don't know quite when construction would actually move forward. And then also putting in your protection measures, like your tree protection fencing, to protect out clearing areas, things like that. And then there's two other sections, a tree protection and maintenance section, and then there's an invasive species control section. So the tree protection area talks about during construction, how you do your clearing near those trees, what kind of pruning you would do to those trees while you're out there to give them the best possible success, I guess you could say, while the construction's going on around them. There has been a little bit back and forth with the forestry, and it looks like now with the natural areas preservation, where we can incorporate, different comments into there. Some was like painting the oaks if the limbs got limbed or cut, sorry. And then in the construction section of it, doing digging differently in that area versus other areas of the site. So that's kind of standard construction items, and then a little bit more above and beyond what we would normally have on a soil erosion control plan. And then for the post-construction section of it, we talk a little bit about how you can maintain those areas in the first 3 or 4 years, and then after that, what we're recommending is then they would need to have a certified arborist and a landscape contractor come out there and assess them again after time and figure out what the most appropriate long-term maintenance of those trees is because we can see what they look like now, we can see what they look like post-construction, and then we don't want to develop a long-term plan without really understanding what the needs are of those trees as they move forward, and seeing what kind of growth we have coming from seedlings or sprouts or things like that. So there's some specific details outlined for the first few years, and then after that, it's saying that the homeowners association needs to develop a long-term plan and provide a copy of it to the city. So it's a mix of both, giving you what we can do short-term and then establishing a way to move forward in a long-term manner. As far as the invasive species control, that's kind of the same thing. We know what understory is out there right now. We know how we'll deal with it during construction and propose a 3-year plan for dealing with the primarily herbaceous invasive species that are underneath those trees right now. But we don't know what's going to come back. So again, it's the kind of thing where you're going to say it's a 3-year plan, and then after that, they would have to develop a longer-term invasive species control plan, dependent on what species are actually still out there and what kind of comes in afterwards. As far as specific to the ones coming from today, how will the oak resprouts be nurtured? We did add in, I'm going to have to see if I can find it in here. There is a note in here that talks about trying to preserve any resprouts of the bur oak or of the oaks that are coming in there. I can look and see if I can find that for you. We don't say that they'll be caged at this point in time. Those are items that we could investigate a little bit further before, it goes to the city council kind of thing and develop that into there. As far as the follow-up treatment for the glyphosate, it would be, so that's a treatment that you're doing to the invasive species, basically Roundup. We're not proposing a mass spraying of the area because this is underneath the root canopy of these other trees. So what we're doing is we're saying you're going to mow the majority of the invasive species that are out there, because as you mow them, you won't get as many seeds that are going and landing in the ground, and it's going to cut down the vegetation. It won't thrive as well because it's being mowed. And then it's more painting on the existing vegetation as opposed to an overall spraying out there, because we don't want to affect the roots of the actual trees that are out there as well. So that's a little bit different than if it was a site where you didn't care about trying to keep the understory and the canopy trees. But it would be follow-up treatment in the same way where you would continue to mow it, and then as needed, you would apply the herbicide directly to the plants as opposed to doing a mass spraying of the area, so that we're really trying to keep it to the invasive species. The natural features areas, how much will be mowed? So on this plan, you can see there's these hatched areas. That's the intended areas for this maintenance plan. So those would be the areas that are mowed. Probably not between the attached houses. I would imagine that because of the location of that, homeowners are probably going to maintain that in a different manner than they would maintain kind of more of the common areas. So that probably wouldn't need to be mowed, but technically it's part of the plan. I would assume that people are going to manage that a little bit differently than some of the other more open areas on the site. Hand pulling and foliar spraying, we can definitely look at, I'm not familiar with tricloper, I can definitely look at that and see, if that makes more sense versus the glyphosate. And then we talked, the hand pulling is definitely an option in later years, but for that first year, hand pulling would be very onerous. It's, the majority of that understory right now is invasive species. From an herbaceous plant, from ground cover perspective, the majority of it is invasive species right now. So doing a hand pulling of that would be very difficult. So at least I would say the first year of it, you're going to need to do an actual herbicide application. And then as you move forward, again, it's an iterative process. You have to kind of respond to what comes back. And so that's why hand pulling is mentioned, but it's not a primary way that we're doing it or proposing it right now. And then as far as how long it's actively managed, the invasive species control has a 3-year time span. And then it says that, if we're not, there's 2 different percentages, I believe. Let me flip to the second page here. There's percentages in here identified where we say a certain percentage of the area needs to be free of invasive species, and if you're not meeting that within the 3-year plan, then it continues on. So ideally, we would be able to get it down to, see here it says, 10% of the total coverage of the site, or of the natural features preservation areas, less than 10% would be invasive species. So that's the goal, and if you haven't met that in the 3 years, then it needs to continue on.
Okay.
Until you achieve that.
All right, so that was a lot.
Sorry.
So no, it's okay, but thank you for
It's
going into all of that
detailed
detail, because I think that helped answer a lot of the questions. I suspect another commissioner might have some follow-ups on that, so I won't go down the rest of my list, other than to just note one, like the fact that this is a PUD gives us the opportunity to even have this sort of long-term agreement about that gets really specific about what we're talking about taking care of over time and putting that responsibility on the condominium association. If we rezone this to R1C and got a by right development in here and got 4,000 square foot houses, it'd be a very different story. And the likelihood of getting this long-term commitment would be much less. So I do want to acknowledge that, and I think that is a real potential benefit. I also want to be careful that we're actually realizing the benefit, because I think that combined with the stormwater above and beyond capture relative to sort of what we're asking for with this PUD, which is just to allow some units to be attached. We're not getting increased density. We're not getting buildings higher than they could be otherwise with by right with the underlying zoning. They're not, the only thing we're really getting with the PUD is the ability to attach units to each other. And so I think there needs to be a balance in terms of what the public benefit is, but I think if we actually get a real long-term commitment to protecting this forest fragment and not allowing it to regenerate over time, that we're confident will be realized, that gives me some confidence that that's worth doing. But I need to have that confidence. So I'll leave the rest of my comments for now in case somebody wants to focus in on this plan.
Commissioner Gubrandal.
Thank you for everybody letting me interrupt your flow here. Ms. Fix, if you could come back up again. A couple of questions. One is, you talked about mowing. Could you talk about the kind of what your we mow our lawns every week this time of year because they're, growing so fast. But what's the pattern of the mowing in order to be able, so we're balancing the whole idea of regeneration of these oaks, right? And if you just mow all the time, then the little oaks aren't going to grow up. So what is the pattern of the mowing that both controls the invasive species, yet at the same time encourages the young oaks that are part of this genetic heritage of these huge old trees to allow to grow?
So part of this plan is to identify where some of those sprouts are coming up. So I think it would be key as the mowing moves forward to know where those are and to not be mowing over them. As far as mowing of the invasive species are concerned, that's probably 2 or 3 times a year as opposed to a weekly kind of a maintenance.
Okay. And then another thing that perhaps could be worked into this is that we have an excellent group within our city called the Natural Areas Preservation Group, which manages these kind of areas all the time. And perhaps there's some way through the plan to be able to have some ongoing consultation with them as to how things are going, because not every arborist kind of gets all the herbaceous stuff and is necessarily looking at the ecosystem health or looking at tree health. And this group is really fabulous with that. They've been doing this all over the city for a long time. They have a lot of knowledge, and there's language in here around working with an arborist and submitting plans to the city on an annual basis, which I think is great. But if there's some way to work in their NAPS evaluation as well, I think that they really would be an excellent organization for you to be able to work with, because they're going to help. They have so much expertise. They're going to be able to help you be way more targeted and successful with how you get this area to regenerate. Because for me, these old trees are amazing, but they're not going to last forever. And part of the point for me personally is that they have the ability to regenerate. And that's what we really want, is to be able to provide the continuance of their genetic legacy over time, so that people in Ann Arbor 200 years from now have a chance to be able to see what those bur oaks are like from when this was first settled here. So I think it's really important that you all have kind of a quality assurance in there in terms of working with the city and the excellent organization that we have that could really help guide you and be more targeted about what your protocols could end up being. And I realize this with the Homeowners Association, and they're just going to have to know what they're signing up for, I think, and that's something that can be part of the master deed in terms of how, what that group is responsible for. Many homeowners associations have, responsibilities, and this one is a little bit different, and it's, again, I agree with Commissioner Trudeau. This gives us the ability. Otherwise, we have ordinances that allow for all these trees to be cut down and for them to mitigate all of them, and that would be a tragedy for me. This allows us to have a lot more control to be able to encourage the ability for these trees to be able to proliferate over the long haul, which is something that's important to me. I would also be careful about reaching the 10% threshold invasiveness, because they can just spread their seed all over again. And so I think more of the ongoing assessment from NAP may be the way to go with some of this, because if it's the wrong kind of 10%, then you can lose it all over again. So, but it's too hard to list out every contingency in here, and so knowing that there's just some way to be able to have interaction with a group of very knowledgeable people that could help guide the Homeowners Association in the future in terms of protecting this legacy that is something that we all are part of in the city of Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Mills.
I'm on this, and then
Go for it. Go for it.
while we're on this, I think I concur that this is the primary benefit that we're seeing of this. I think that the actual number of trees is quite comparable to what we saw in the initial area plan. Thank you for pointing out that chart, by the way. That was really helpful. I think that the idea of planning the screening, that was what's required in the underlying R1E with conditions anyway, so that's not really an additional benefit. The same with like the water, this is what we saw before. So I think that this is the key benefit. I have others that I think could be provided, but what I'm concerned about is that, what I'm curious to hear from staff is how is this enforced? Because if this is the benefit, what happens if those oak shoots, sprouts, whatever they're called, are not protected and they're just mowed over with everything else? Like, what's the recourse and who's going to go out and check that? So if this is the benefit that's being offered, I want to have some kind of assurance that we're actually going to see it come to fruition. And so how is it enforced and what happens if it's not happening?
There may be a couple of ways. Just thinking out loud is, one, before they even got C of O's, we would make sure that they're adhering to the site plan. But it's primarily probably going to be complaint driven. So if we receive complaints from their own homeowners association that it's out of compliance, then it's out of compliance with the site plan and the supplemental regulations. So then staff, probably myself or somebody on planning commission, or I'm sorry, on the planning department, would then start enforcement that they're not keeping up their end of the bargain.
And what would enforcement look like, though, once it's already built?
We do have the option of writing tickets. Of course, we're hoping that they cooperate with us before we get to that level. I mean, we'd probably start off with some violation letters. Go out, we do an inspection, violation letters. Hopefully it's corrected at that point. If not, then you could get into the ticket writing. But rarely does it go down that road.
We might also be able to explore some other models. We do have some, as was referenced during the testimony previously, there are some requirements for stormwater systems, for regular reports to be submitted to the Water Resources Commissioner. My instinct is that we could likely look to build in some potential ongoing reporting requirement. One of the things that would be helpful for advice-wise from this board is there a term to that? Is it indefinite? That would be helpful to know. I don't know what the terminology of that is, but we could work with staff to find out what the information that would be helpful for that on an ongoing basis. And then I don't say it that I would apply the same, but we could also potentially look at, similar to our premium requirements, that we provide premium benefits if you meet LEED certification. If you don't do that, there's a financial penalty. That could potentially be a means to add an additional enforcement mechanism into PUD regulations beyond the normal infraction of city code.
So from my perspective, if this is the primary benefit that this is offering above and beyond what I see is already required, then I think that that's really, really important. I think I would want to know from NAP, like, what means they have. I mean, I don't know if bonding for this is something, like a performance bond or whatever it's called, where I don't know, I work in wind energy, put down something so that you don't hurt the roads. You get your money back if as long as you don't screw up the roads. So that, in my mind, is really, really important, and that's got to be rock solid. If there's questions right now from NAP, makes me, I'll be 100%, I can't vote for this tonight affirmatively. Like, at the very least, that would need to be postponed. So I would, if this is the primary benefit of this, then I want to make sure that they're on board with the plan, that they know that it's enforceable, that there is real teeth to it not, if it's not being followed through. I think that's really important. The other thing, particularly as it relates to the invasive species, and maybe this is where I was confused before, there was talk about the first recourse would be to the homeowners, but when we're talking, if something about trees, you first go to the neighbor and then you go to the homeowners association. But where we're talking about this natural areas, these aren't on private property, right? It's on the communally owned land. So then what? Then it goes directly to the homeowners association, right?
Yep, that would be common space to the homeowners.
Okay, and
association.
That's true too between these attached units in the middle. Like, that's not anybody's backyard. That's all common area, right?
That's homeowners. Yep, homeowners association.
Homeowners association. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay, very good, thanks. So I think that that's really, really important, and there's something about, I think that needs to be tightened up. That being said, I think that there are other benefits that we could see here that are much more enforceable in the short term. Like that if you do this, then you get your certificate of occupancy and you're done. Like there's not this ongoing maintenance. So I think it's helpful to acknowledge that. The one thing that was brought up already was the affordable housing contribution. And yes, it's not exceeding what the current density is, but the R1C density would have been 46 units. And so it just so happens that 10% of the addition of that is what would be required if we were looking at that R1C, comparing it to R1C. And so I think there's space for being able to make a contribution to or to dedicate 5 of those units to as affordable units. I think that's one option. The other option that I didn't hear a lot of people in the audience discussing today, but that was in our packet a lot, was talking about exceeding energy efficiency requirements, or just energy requirements. And I think that is something that certainly ticks the box for a PUD. And to see a development that is entirely solar ready, or knowing that we're trying to go for good tree canopy, at least identifying those places where it's unlikely to be shaded and making those units solar ready, I think again would show that's something that you can build right in from the beginning, and you can show when you get your certificate of occupancy that you've ticked that box. Or the other thing that came up a lot in the comments that I am increasingly thinking is a good way to move is towards making sure that everything is all electric. I currently have a gas furnace as well, as most people probably do, but if we're serious about climate change, we can't be using that natural gas in the long haul. And so at least wiring things so that you can have electric heating units is really important. And so that's something that you could build in now that would be a public benefit, where I could see this as getting when you build it, then there's no need for this long-term maintenance plan necessarily, though it would be great to have multiple benefits of this, and others may have a different feeling about which of those benefits is most beneficial. So I think that there are potential benefits that could be built in here. I'm not convinced that I think the maintenance plan for the natural area is plausible, but it's not, there's too many potential holes in it right now. I don't think it's enforceable enough, and so I'm not comfortable with it as is. The other question that I had is this memo, Chris, that we got from the senior project engineer that effectively told us, like, this should not be scheduled for planning commission until these actions have been addressed. Have they been addressed yet?
These comments came out a little late, as you can see by the date, but having discussions with them, I don't think these are issues that they couldn't handle before it went on to city council, but sounds like we can probably get them addressed if it does get postponed and come back with these being addressed.
Great. Okay, so just wanted to note that these are outstanding, so regardless of if people also think that we should postpone this, like, there should be some stipulation on this. Thank you.
Commissioner Trudeau and Commissioner Woods.
Thank you. So I was also leaning towards a postponement to get some more clarification on this long-term maintenance plan and the enforceability, and if NAP needs to be involved, finding out what they think about this and how they see being involved with it, because I think it has to be, it'd be very easy for this to be let go, and eventually we notice or we don't notice, and then there's really no penalty. So I'd also agree some kind of financial penalty above and beyond simple zoning compliance would make sense if this is the benefit we're going to see. Just to clear my plate of other points I wanted to make that I've been weighing, thinking about this one, is we have to make decisions with the ordinances we have, not the ordinances we wish we have. So there are a lot of things I would love to see. I would love to see affordable housing contributions. I'd love to see us moving to, as a city that's electrifying in anticipation of all of the energy transitions we will be needing to make if we're going to address the climate crisis seriously. Those aren't the ordinances we have here, but I think those are things that we need to start talking about. In terms of affordability, I think if this was rezoned to R1C, there would be fewer houses and they'd be a lot bigger and they would be a lot more expensive. And if, or nothing would be financially viable because we just somehow can't find a way that something can be built that a developer can actually raise money to pay for, which then nothing would happen, which maybe some people would be perfectly happy with. But then that has an affordability impact as well, because the people who would be buying and moving into these homes are going to live somewhere. And if they can afford a $450,000 home, they're going to buy the next best thing. And we can't make people go away just by not building houses. And so as a city as a whole, and as a region as a whole, if we don't allow development where we've identified we want development to happen, which is in the freeway, within the freeway ring in places we've zoned for development, then we're going to be digging that hole even deeper. And so I think in terms of character and how things fit in, I live in a neighborhood that has an SRO right next door and duplexes on my block and small apartment building across the street and a whole bunch of single family homes, and I think it's great. I think a lot of people would be perfectly happy living in a mix of some attached townhouses and some single family homes. I don't think having some diversity of housing type is bad, and it leads to a diversity of different kinds of people with different kinds of preferences, which I view as a value and a benefit, and not a homogeneous neighborhood where everything's exactly the same is class-based segregation, and I don't think that's a good thing either. And so I'm happy to let the houses be attached to each other. I don't think that's a huge reach in terms of the character of the neighborhood. And I think these are going to be smaller than what we would see. These homes would be smaller than what we would see if we reverted to the adjacent zoning once something was built at all. In terms of being green and sustainable, one of the ways we get to, and also dealing with traffic, is one of the ways we deal with, we're causing traffic is by not adding a lot of homes. We're at a regional scale, we're building at historically low rates. It doesn't feel that way, but it's true, and I can show you the data if you're curious. And so people are moving farther and farther away, and we're still adding jobs, the university's still growing. Those are things that are out of our control, but what is in our control is how we manage how things are built and how much is built. And so if we don't want people driving lots and lots of miles on our roads and clogging our streets, building homes closer to where they're going to is one way to reduce the amount of time cars are spending on the roads. I saw in some of the comments we received that we wouldn't expect people spending $350,000 to $450,000 on a house to be taking the bus. And as somebody who spent about $350,000 on a house, I take the bus, I ride my bike. We have a car, we have one car for our household. We drive it less than 5,000 miles a year. We went without a car for about a year. People will make that choice. And I have a lot of friends who live along Packard, and one of the reasons they choose to live along Packard is the bike lane is great, and it's a great way to get into town. Just because it wouldn't be for you doesn't mean it's not for anybody. And just because that person might have slightly different preferences than what you would choose doesn't mean they're going to be a bad neighbor. And so I just want to push back a little bit on the assumptions about what will happen here over the long haul. And I think the alternative is either nothing gets built or we build much less and we have more traffic, people are driving many more miles, and we're going to have a harder and harder time sustaining the city both environmentally and financially to handle that infrastructure and handle moving people around. So anyway, those were kind of all the things I was weighing as I was thinking about this. I really care a lot about the sustainability and affordability aspect, and it's complicated. And it kind of how you think about it depends on how far you zoom out. Like if you look at just this one block, your perspective is going to be a little bit different than if you zoom out to the broader area of the city, of the ward, the city as a whole, and sort of the job shed of where people are coming from. But I am happy to consider a postponement, especially to get feedback on NAP and or potentially see a reconsideration of what the public benefit mix is to get past that hurdle. Thanks.
Commissioner Woods, And then I'm going to this side of the room.
My comment's going to be short. I too am thinking that there are enough issues out there that perhaps a postponement might make sense. And indeed, I actually would want a little bit more information about that house that was the older farmhouse that was mentioned. I was doing a little math here, and it looks like it's about 179 years old. That's pretty old. That's got me by a few years, you know. Not many.
Looking
But, you know, but seriously, maybe what does it hurt to have a little bit more information? And I certainly would like to have that, and so if that's possible, let's add that to the list as well. So thank you.
Commissioner Ackerman, then Briggs, then Sauvé, then Weatherby.
Well, first, I appreciate having colleagues like you all. I think a postponement makes a lot of sense. I think there are outstanding issues. Also, just, so I appreciate that. I was actually going to move a postponement if there are other comments for what we should consider during that time. I'm happy to wait, but at some point, I'd love to make that motion.
I will be sure to come back to you.
Great.
Commissioner Briggs.
Yeah, so on the plan here, I don't see the existing house where it's situated. Could that be pointed out? Okay, and so when that comes, there's a detention basin right adjacent to it, correct? I just don't see the house actually listed on the current site plan. It's just right over there. Okay. Okay, so in terms of what comes next, my understanding is that you do not own this house currently. That is correct. Do you mind coming up? Do you mind coming up here for just a sec? So it sounds like there has been maybe a little progress from the neighborhood in terms of making some contact with that homeowner. Would you have any interest in purchasing that home if it became available for sale?
I don't know.
So your plan in perpetuity is your hope is that house would remain there, or that gets just sold separately? What would happen if how does that interact with your plan?
Long as it didn't delay it, it's fine if it goes down the road, or, it's preserved, or whatever they decide to do with it. But it is not part of my agreement. Nor is it part of the thing before, or the stuff before you.
Okay. So it was a previous?
No, never has been.
Okay, just curious.
Not from day one.
Okay. Thanks. I think that's for you, the only question right now. So, I guess in terms of how we're able to move forward with this, if there is an opportunity it's hard for me to understand, even though I really, really respect your fight for this house and the historic preservation element of it. I think it's really important. It's hard for me to understand how we integrate that into what we're doing, even though I see it as a very worthwhile goal for our community. And so, has staff considered opportunities for this in the past, if that were to become available? Is that something that's come up in discussions?
The only discussion that I've had is with the Parks Department, and it just, we can get more detail, but there's been no application for them to formally look into this. But from the initial discussions, there probably is not going to be a lot of interest, but we can explore that further.
Okay. Is there precedent in terms of previous projects that have happened in town in terms of how something like this might have been integrated in?
I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Okay. Do you have any ideas? I'm curious, in terms of...
I think Parks may be our best hope, maybe possibly Cobblestone, but
yeah,
we can definitely get back with more information.
Okay, so in terms of what I'm hearing, even though I feel like this is really worthwhile is whether it's a lack of imagination on our part, which is completely possible. We may need some help in terms of thinking about how to make that move forward quickly. But otherwise, it may be a separate, longer-term effort to make sure that that preservation happens regardless of what happens on this site. I wanted to make sure I addressed that because you've been coming very persistently to these meetings, and this has been something that you've been advocating for a long time. In terms of some of the other issues that I heard that came up, a lot of them related to congestion and traffic speeds, and I don't want to dismiss those because I know that they are really legitimate concerns, but in many ways, there will be, I don't think the choice is whether or not there's development here or not. I think there's going to be development here. It's just kind of the nature of what happens. And so that is something that is going to continue to be an issue. And how we integrate and address those issues, in my opinion, have a lot less to do with this development, and a lot more to do with what we do with our transportation plan, which is also being updated right now. And also advocacy on the part of your neighborhood to be looking for measures along that corridor that would slow traffic, asking council to be investing in measures and initiatives that will slow traffic along that. These are traffic tools that we have at our disposal that we're not using in our community right now, and there's a pretty big debate about whether or not they should be used. And so I hope that on that issue, you continue to fight and continue to suggest that that's something that needs to be done. In terms of this project that is in front of us, I'm struggling because there's just the desire to push this back to the comparison between the old plan and, but as I read our PUD requirements, it's very hard for me to see how this, as it is situated, even if we have more, a greater protection, long-term protection for these natural features that are existing in the plan, it doesn't, to me, yet feel like it meets the merit of a PUD. I see how it's much better than the previous plan, but I don't know that that's exactly what the comparison that I'm supposed to be making. This is a different proposal that's coming in front of me, and does it meet that proposal? However, it's challenging not to support it because the alternative that is likely to exist if we don't support it is not likely to be as good. And so we're not faced with, regardless of whether it's blackmail or not, there's the reality of what we want to see moving forward, and this is not my ideal. I would be interested to see some of those other pieces that come forward in terms of protecting. I would like to see something come back that has additional benefits. I think there are substantial additional benefits that you could put in here in terms of sustainability. I don't get the sense that you're going to be inclined towards affordability. That's fine. I think there's a whole list of things in our that you could be working towards that would make it a lot easier to support this, that add additional benefits. I see some, but I'd like to, if this is about natural features, I think there should be more natural features preserved here than what we have right now. So that's where I'm at right now.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Now I have to talk. I'm in the queue. I mean, I appreciate all of the comments, so I can keep it a bit brief because there's a lot of unpacking of, I think, my thoughts. I want to have a hat tip to Commissioner Trudeau, especially for unpacking a lot of the references to the larger scale. And I think that's what I've been kind of battling with what this PUD is for public benefit, and the kind of three that are bullet pointed in this condition of the management of stormwater to offsite neighbors. That's one it's stormwater management to neighboring private property. This doesn't feel like a large public benefit as something to handle. And so thinking of public benefit at a more significant scale. And so the natural features and just the fabric of the forest in this area, I think, is something significant to be looked at. And I think that maintenance plan is something I would support a postponement to make sure that we have that tightened up to pursue. I do think even looking at the proposed housing typology and the comments about the solar-ready design, I would request that we see something, if we go to postponement, about the assessment of solar access on each of these parcels, and if the design of these homes could actually lean towards an assessment of solar ready. So, because especially in the middle, if we do not have a large canopy because of power lines and clearing and trees, we may have access for a lot more solar gain on these roofs. If the roofs were designed in a different way than the current typology presented. So I think there is some creative thinking that we can request on this to get a larger environmental impact and sustainability initiatives on the project. So that would be something that I would want to see pursued if this is postponed and then comes back to us. I think those are my 2 cents.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Make it a full house here. I agree kind of with what everybody has said. One of the things that kind of popped into my head was for a maintenance plan. You know, we look at affordable housing in like 10-year, 15-year, 99-year. I would love to see a maintenance plan for 99 years on this site. Is that realistic long-term? Maybe not, but maybe it is for 40 years, enough to get one of those oak saplings actually functional. And I think one of the things that I look on this, I had a conversation with someone, a coworker of mine today, who is just put an offer on a condo quite close to this site. And it's a really nice condo. It was built in 1994. It was the one that she could afford. And it came in at a pretty decent price. And when I looked at it, it was an expensive luxury condo in 1994. But today, because we're now, 1994 was not that long ago to me, but it, 20-some years down the road, you know, that became the housing that is a much more affordable compared to what's built now. And so I think we do have to look at that of what we're looking for, and especially on this site, is maybe not tomorrow or next year, but we're looking at, I think we do need some housing in the future that will be accessible to people, that will be older housing at some point in the future. And I think as other people have discussed, you know, we want to look at these trees, not just these trees, because these trees will at some point have outlived their life, but what is the next tree that comes in? And so we can't do that if there's nothing there. And so that's, I will certainly support a postponement, but I think that's one of the things that I'm thinking of is not so much even for me. I know when I look at things around my house, it's always like, well, how does this affect me? But I have to think in my head of like, how does this affect the next me? And how do I reconcile that to, and it's not always easy. Those two things aren't always easy. And I admire the neighbors for caring, because I think that's really important, and that will carry you through whatever happens on this site. You know, you have a great neighborhood and great neighbors, and I think that's really the important part. So.
Mr. Leonard.
So I'm taking notes about follow-up, and I guess I want to pose a question, maybe potentially both to the Planning Commission and to the petitioner. I think the petitioner has been fairly focused on faithfulness to the current maximum density allowed by the site. A question to both the Planning Commission and to the petitioner: would there be any flexibility in adding more attached product that could potentially open up space for restoration, retention of that historic home on site or other natural features? I understand that you don't own it, but
Mr. Heisler, if you could step up to the microphone.
We've spent over 3 years working on this. We've met the requirements as far as we're concerned. You can argue both ways. We're committed to the density, the layout, and a vote next month, period. We'll take your things under consideration, but we will respectfully disagree that we've met the requirements. You set the rules, we didn't. So it's great to want some things like all-electric house. I don't know how many of you live in an all-electric house. I don't even know what to design to. I have all the criteria. Those houses are the ones we started with. We've worked a long time to get there. So I'm not changing the whole plan. I mean, I'll answer your questions, but I'll expect a vote because we respectfully disagree on some fundamental things then. I'm trying to work with everybody, and that's what we're trying to do. We came here in good faith with this plan, trying to get back to what everyone was saying was the initial area plan and where it was voted. We try to get there. But we're not redesigning something that I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with the rules you've set before me. And I'm just not going to do it. Thank you.
So before we move to postponement, the only thing I'd like to add in regards to the maintenance plan. So in a typical transaction, when a homeowner buys a new construction property, what ends up happening is the developer, by state law, has to provide the master deed and bylaws to a potential home buyer, either before they sign the purchase agreement or after they sign a purchase agreement. They have 9 days to review, and if during those 9 days they're not satisfied with what they see there, they often just, they can back out or they can move forward. The issue is that with the maintenance plan, this could be a major expense to the homeowners in this development. And I'm sure it will be somewhere in that book, which is the master deed and bylaws, buried deep in there. And honestly, it could even be in the first 2 pages. But the reality is the number of home buyers who will actually open up that big book and read through it is, I can probably say the percentage of that is in single digits. So what I'd like to see potentially in the maintenance plan, development agreement, somewhere in there, that there be a separate document that's provided to home buyers that maybe will catch their attention a little bit more than it buried in a master deed and bylaws for a neighborhood. So I'd like to add that to the list as well. And with that, I will head over to Commissioner Ackerman for a motion to postpone.
Thank you. I would move to postpone to a date set by staff.
And do we have a seconded by Commissioner Mills? Any discussion on the postponement? All those in favor to postpone, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? It is postponed. Thank you. We are now moving on to audience participation. This is an opportunity for anybody in the audience to address the Planning Commission in regards to any item. You can speak to us for up to 3 minutes. All you'll have to do is state your name and address for the record, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to speak to us about anything at all.
Hi. Sorry, just testing. Pam Gibney, 2720 Cranbrook. Over the years since we've been in our house, I did some research on it, and our complex, our subdivision, was built over top of a swamp, and that is the reason for a lot of our flooding that we have. The idea that these people, when it comes to the project, are going to raise theirs up worries me that things may flow into our neighborhood even more. I understand that they have the retaining water system and stuff, but it makes me uneasy. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Brian Taylor, 2814 Cranbrook. I do want to thank all of you for your concerns and I appreciate your adjourning this so you can get a more clear idea about, what is going to be the specifics of a maintenance plan. I think that's really important. I think that when you're turning something over to a homeowners association, that there's ample room for there to be misunderstandings, and I'm very impressed with the specifics that you're asking for. So I appreciate that, and I do want to reiterate, I think it's very unfortunate to have some sort of a pressure over your head that is an intention to intimidate you, and I don't think that's appropriate whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the thing I'd like you to consider is, there have been lots of things said about how they're going to look out for the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff, but they aren't policing the trees on the perimeter of the property right now. To let branches fall in your yard, and unless you want to go over and pick a fight with them about it, you clean it up. I would think that if they really had wished to get along with the neighborhood, they'd be policing the trees along the borders right now and not letting the branches fall in people's yards.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor, 2814 Cranbrook. I appreciate so much your wisdom, Shannon, about the NAP. And I really don't want any herbicides on the property. And of course, if NAP talks to them, they'll do a regulated burn instead if this has to happen or whatever. They'll do something. I don't want any more chemicals. The whole neighborhood's dealing with cancer, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm back, Karen White. The house, it seems to date from 1849. The property was originally owned by Charles and Ezra Maynard. The Maynards sold it to Moses Collins. Moses Collins set aside 10 acres and sold that to his son. In 1849, the son of Moses Collins, that son's wife, and their infant child were living in the house. It is one of the oldest houses in Mallett's Creek settlement, predates lots of other stuff. It is one of the very few original houses left in Mallett's Creek. And I think it is entirely possible to move it to Cobblestone Farm. It is something we've been talking about amongst the local preservation group for several years, and we would be much further along in the process if we had been allowed access to the house, to document it, to get serious about what it was going to take to move it and who could move it, and raising the funds to do that. I look forward to having more conversations about that house. It's totally doable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for letting me talk again. I appreciate everything everybody said. It was very insightful. If you haven't already had a chance to walk the property, I'd like to invite you. I live on Easy Street, and please walk the property, see what everybody's talking about, because I'm on Carmel, and that back property along Carmel has a huge slope to it. So if we're talking about excavating or anything, I'm inviting all of you to come and walk that property. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Eileen Greener, Easy Street, 2889. Thank you very much. I so appreciate your comments, your wisdom. The comment by Mr. Leonard to perhaps change the plan, tweak it a bit. I find it very disingenuous that the petitioner refuses to do any of that. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your thoughtful discussion and clearly echoing many of the concerns that were voiced by the group here. I think a postponement is a great idea. I appreciate your choosing that. I think the focus on enforcement and the real thoughtfulness around how it would actually work and making sure that promises aren't empty is really critical and requires a lot of diligence, and it sounds like that's going to happen, hopefully. The idea that someone threw out about actually having more attached properties sounds like an exciting variation, and I know the petitioner is saying they don't want to change their plans, but this is the dirty negotiation and back and forth, and the city wants something back for the PUD, and that could actually create more of the type of environment that we're looking for, where actually more natural features are preserved, and the overall ambience of the thing becomes better. So I think a little more exploration as to what this is going to look like instead of a cookie cutter subdivision with slightly oversized houses crammed into small lots is worthy of pursuit. And thanks for trying to get more for the PUD. And I understand that Scott, you were very articulate about many of you, about what are the alternatives. We're not living in the ideal world. We're living with choices. I don't have the insight as to what the alternatives actually are. But at least I appreciate the fact that you're all saying, what can we get for this that makes sense and justifies the purpose of a PUD, which many of you guys have articulated. And so more creative thinking and less barreling forward, I think, would be great, which seems to be happening, I think would be a great thing on this. And with respect to the petitioners, because they're doing their job as well. I mean, I don't think anybody here is evil. We're just negotiating difficult things. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishes to address the Planning Commission? All right, seeing no one, I'll move on with our agenda. And the next item is Commission Proposed Business, which is going to take a slightly different turn this evening because it's potentially the end of time for two planning commissioners this evening. The mayor has appointed two new people to the Planning Commission, as Commissioner Ackerman mentioned, and this could very well be the last meeting for Commissioner Weatherby and Commissioner Trudeau. So I'd like to thank the both of you for your service. I believe both of you have some comments that you'd like to share, so I'm happy to hand it over, and then I'm sure there's several of other commissioners who will say some words, and I reserve the right to be the last one to speak. So I think Commissioner Trudeau is dying to get the microphone, so since this is possibly your last meeting, I will hand it off to you.
I want to make sure that we get a picture.
And we will get a photo before we leave. Yes. Who has long arms? Commissioner Trudeau.
Yeah, I wrote some notes because I realized this was going to be my last meeting earlier today. I was doing the math. First, I wanted to thank staff. I started on Planning Commission in a period of transition. We had an interim planning manager, and it was sort of a learning process for a lot of us. I think our city has an incredibly dedicated, steady, capable, and responsible staff. And so I thank Mr. Leonard, Chris, who are here, and everybody who has been with us. I really appreciate all of the effort you put into things, your deep wells of patience for us as commissioners. These things are complicated with so many moving parts to help us all get our heads around things and really make good decisions. So thank you. I want to thank my fellow commissioners. Your various experiences have been a great education for me and for the community. I think we are, again, blessed as a community to have and that's not a word I use a lot, but blessed as a community to have such committed people with such really deep benches of experience. I think we see that tonight with when there's anything with natural features, Commissioner Gibrandal is like the go-to person. There's probably nobody better in the city to truly be handling those, and I think that goes for a lot of the people who sit at this table. So thank you all. And I want to thank the community. We have a very engaged citizenry, and people care a lot about their neighborhoods and care a lot about the city, and that's not true everywhere you go, and I think that's really important and one of the reasons this is such a great city to live in. I'm a little sad because I wanted to do one more term. I think there's some really great stuff coming up. In particular, one of the things I've said over and over again, as I've said at this table, is we are like the importance of really taking a look at our master plan and doing a master plan update. We're transitioning from a period of the city as a city of development where we've sort of identified the parts of the city that will be developed that used to be farms and natural areas, and now we're really transitioning to a phase of redevelopment where almost everything we're going to see in the near future, other than a couple of parcels, is going to be redevelopment, and I think that requires a very different mindset. And so as we revisit that master plan, that's one thing I really I think is a huge opportunity for the city to really reflect on how we want to approach that going forward. And as I'd sort of made comments earlier tonight about sort of who's coming, who's going, what we have control over, what we don't have control over, and the choices we make or don't make matter. And so hopefully that will provide us a good tool to guide us for the next decades. And it's an important one. So I'll continue to be involved in paying attention to that process because I think that's really key. And I just wanted to, figuring out what I'm going to have a bunch of free time now. So I've been thinking about what I want to dedicate that time to. And like, I care a lot about, the reason I came to this table I care a lot about housing and housing affordability, and I care a lot about the climate and the climate crisis. And I think land use has an underappreciated role in both of those things, and this is the table where those decisions get made. It connects to transportation, it connects to a lot of things. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going to be figuring out how to put my energy, but I think I just wanted to remind us all that we are a city of many advantages. We have a world-class university, we have a lot of wealth, especially compared to other cities in Michigan. And that gives us, I think, a special responsibility to really take those challenges seriously, because the changes are coming whether we like it or not. The climate crisis isn't going to go away. We are in a relatively climate stable region with a relatively healthy economy, with a lot of fresh water that, as long as we protect it, will be here for a while. And so a lot more people are going to be looking to come our way. And if we aren't thinking about long-term how we're going to accommodate that and do that in a sustainable way that doesn't exacerbate the crisis, which means fewer miles driving in our internal combustion engine cars and getting around and moving ourselves around differently and living more compactly, like that's all going to matter a lot. And if we can't figure out how to take the lead on some of those really difficult issues as a wealthy city with a whole bunch of resources that many other places don't have, then we are all in trouble. And this body, and this also message also goes to council, is like we have a responsibility there, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to require changes we're not always going to like or want to see happen, but changes we're not going to like or want to see happen are coming. And so I really, really, really want to make that point that we have to start taking this more seriously, and that's where I'm going to be putting my advocacy energy. So you'll probably start seeing me on the other side of the table as things go forward. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've learned a ton, and I'm really excited about the nominees. I think there's a great applicant pool. Like, we have a whole bunch of really smart, talented people, and so the nominees look great. Looking forward to seeing what they do at this table. And I feel a little bad for them that they're going to be coming into this PUD that's been a project that's been going on for years that has a lot of history, and they're going to be hearing about it for the first time at their first meeting potentially. So good luck with that. Thanks again.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Well, I wasn't really planning to speak, not knowing when our last meeting is, although I was kind of putting off thinking about it. But I agree with everything that Commissioner Trudeau says. I also am counting on someone here to talk about having doors on main thoroughfares. So somebody has to take up that mantle, because that was my kind of thing of having doors on major streets. And R4C, good luck to those of you. But know that you will have a citizen participant who is happy to help you on any of these. And as Commissioner Trudeau said, I'm really looking forward in some ways to doing more advocacy. One of the things that people don't realize is we are limited in what advocacy we can do when we're on this body. We can't, I wouldn't say can't, but we don't want, participation in some things is more difficult because we are on this side of the dais or whatever this is. And so I am looking forward actually to being on the other side, and I can do a wicked 3-minute speech, and and so I will, show up in places and online, and really trying to advocate for, what I think is the best of Ann Arbor, and I do think in large part the people are the best of Ann Arbor. I don't know that buildings are really our strong suit in general. I think it's hard for us to look. I went to school at the University of Colorado where the buildings are sort of front and center, and they're beautiful, and they're all the same style, and that's what they do. And we don't have that, which is both good and bad, because we can't point to one thing and says, this is our style. We can point to 100 things and say, this is our style, depending on which neighborhood and where we are. And that has strengths and weaknesses. But, Ann Arbor is a great place to live, and I plan on probably be the last owner of my house, given the way things go. Our house was built in 1919. We're the second owners. Probably be the last, which is, kind of bittersweet. But I've seen a lot of development in my neighborhood, as you know, and I'm sure there will be a lot more. And it's kind of exciting, actually, to think of all these new people who are going to be living there. And so I assume you will be voting on more things in my neighborhood, and, I will be nice to you. I won't always agree with you, but I'll be nice to you. But anyway, this has been a really great group of people to work with, and I've learned a lot, and hopefully you've learned from me, and this is, we're counting on you all, and it's a great group, and you haven't seen the last of me, especially if, we continue on in the next month, but I'll be on one side of the table here, so it's probably going to be the other side, but you never know. What's that? Yeah, I'm blackmailing you. So I think I am hoping to see you all a lot in the future in whatever venue that is. So thank you all.
Commissioner Briggs.
So Scott and Julie, thank you so much for your really dedicated and service and insightful presence that you bring to the table. As you've all said, this is a really pleasant, this is my second stint on Planning Commission. Not that my last group of Planning Commissioners wasn't lovely, but I actually think this is, I really appreciate the voice the voices that exist around this table, and really will miss yours. And I'm excited. It sounds like there's some other good candidates that have been put forward that are coming. And while you've been so positive, I can't help but say I'm really frustrated to see and publicly say that I'm really frustrated to see the circumstances under which that you've been asked to leave. I think we are volunteers around this table, and what was done to you, I believe, was unacceptable. I think it was wrong to remove people from the Planning Commission simply because some around the council table don't appreciate how they speak. And I've seen how you speak on social media, and it is not, in my opinion, unpleasant. Perhaps truthful, but sometimes the truth is hard to hear. And I don't think that, I think it is hard to realize that as volunteers, what the message that has been given to the rest of us is that perhaps that we should silence our voices. As commissioners, we're volunteers, and your communications have been FOIA'd by people. It's a really strange time that we're living in our city, and I find it to be really strange that we're supposedly a very progressive, liberal community, and yet there is so much animosity between folks that really probably are not that far apart on many of the issues, that it's kind of gotten to this point that volunteers are being asked to leave commissions for what it's really hard to understand. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing your advocacy.
Commissioner Woods.
Never have figured out how to turn this on. But to both Scott and to Julie, there's a lot of power on that side of the table, so don't forget that. In fact, there's more power there than there is on this side. So make sure you use it. I'm sure you will. And the other thing I guess I want to say is, have either one of you decided whether or not you're going to run for president? Because as I understand, you know, the debates don't start till next week. You still got time. We can pass the hat right now and get your little funds. But it is good to know that you are not hanging up your hats and that you are going to be very, very much involved, because that's important. That's probably one of the most important things that we know to be true. A lot of times people say, speak truth to power. And the other day, my husband said, how about speak truth to foolishness? And I like that, too. So thank you for doing that, because I think very much you've done that. And we will miss sitting beside you, but it's good to know that we can always link arms on any kind of issue that comes up. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Gabrandel.
I'm really going to miss the two of you. And a couple of things. One is that you both are so prepared, but then when you come, you really listen and you're able to think on your feet too. So you don't come in with a preconceived idea necessarily, but you've been really thoughtful about it, and then you listen to everybody, and then I see you churning and figuring it out, and both of you are so articulate about that, and I really appreciate that. So that's something you share, but in terms of your differences, things I appreciate. Julie, I'm a townie like you, and I love how you know every street from the walkability side. It's like, well, I've seen bikes piled up on that corner, and you have such a granular sense of the city that I will really miss that voice that you have. And Scott, you have such an amazing grasp of the big picture in terms of the master plan, in terms of tonight's meeting, I think really just showcased that. And I'm really, truly going to miss both of you. And I expect you on the other side, but it'd be really nice to see you in other ways too. So, thank you.
Commissioner Mills.
Well, when I go after Commissioner Gabrandel, like, she literally takes big picture, like, walkability off of my list. So I will just echo in that it has been a joy to get to sit at the table with you. This is my social life, because it's a big commitment, right? And so I both, like, envy you having your Tuesday nights back, right? But look forward to seeing you still on Tuesday nights, because your voices are really, really important. I really appreciate your big picture, Commissioner Trudeau. Also, and sort of getting at what Commissioner Gabrandel said earlier, I really appreciate that you share with us when you're grappling with issues, like when you see both sides and how that balance helps, because I think a lot of us do that internally and don't share it externally, and I think that's really important for people to see. These are not easy decisions, right? And so I think that that's really helpful. And Commissioner Weatherby, like, I really appreciate how you relate what's going on, like your own experience in your neighborhood, to people, and let them see, like, I'm in your shoes. This is, and put yourself out there. Like, often you say, I wasn't sure what I was going to think about this, but this is how it turned out. Or also holding people's feet to the fire and saying, like, no, that's not the way it's going to be used. Like, that is not where people are going to put their bicycles. They are going to put their bicycle very near the front door, right? And so I think that that's really helpful to, you have a great way of engaging with people who come and speak before us. So you're both really going to be missed, but again, I'm looking forward to continuing to see you on Tuesday nights and follow your tweets on Mondays. Yes.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioners Weatherby and Trudeau, for your service. Scott, I joined Planning Commission when Sabra Breer retired in December of 2016, and you've been part of my Planning Commission experience throughout, which has been one of the most rewarding and challenging tasks as an elected official is serving on this body as well. Your role and your perspective, in my own experience, has been fundamental. I think people said big picture, but it's this ability to zoom out to see what are the trends happening nationally and what do those feel like here in Ann Arbor, because we're not alone on so many of these issues, and there are things that we can learn from other communities, and all we have to do is look outside of ourselves. And you do such a tremendous job of saying, let's not be an island. Let's learn from other people's failures and try to create as proactively as possible a solution that will work for everyone, regardless of income, regardless of zip code, regardless of education level. And that's a really powerful thing. And I hope that voice, is continued to heard in this chamber from you. And I think no one knows the journey of voice better than Commissioner Woods, having been on city council, having been a planning commissioner, having been a citizen advocate. And when she says, you have power out there, I hope you use it. Same to you, Julie. You joined the planning commission just after me, I think.
Meeting after.
Yeah. And you came in as one of the neighborhood representatives, right? That is your function, and you've taken that so sincerely to heart. You see your role here is to add different perspective, to add perspective of what it is to live on one of these blocks affected by development, affected by change that people in this room feel, change that you feel, and you feel probably more significantly than most neighborhoods in town, right? And you bring that voice and you bring that perspective from the street, and that's really, really appreciated. I think I was underappreciated. You guys have had my votes my entire tenure on council. I think you earned the position in your applications originally. I think you've continued to earn it every day. You've served the people of Ann Arbor, and I'm incredibly grateful to have worked with you.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Okay, so I got 1 year in, right? So it's the youngest term person on the board. I would say, Scott, you and I met when I had big dreams before I joined Planning Commission, and so this is your fault. Thank you. And Julie, you've been kind of my hipmate for a very long time here. So I think both of you actually as some of the largest mentors to me over this first year. So I very much appreciate you supporting me, learning kind of how to be on this side of the table and how to use kind of my power, knowledge, and background to support projects going forward and lean into difficult decisions. So I am going to miss you on Tuesdays, but actually I'm glad we're all Facebook friends so I can follow you and your voice in different ways. I think your social media, I appreciate your voice on social media. I'll say that there. Thank you.
So, before I get to the gushy stuff, maybe about 6, maybe 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to take some training that was for planning commissioners, planning staff. It was just sort of a planning workshop, and this may have been also as my role on the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I remember we had a breakout session at one point, and one of the staff that had served as a planning commissioner in the past, as we were discussing, like, how do you treat planning commission meetings, how do you treat planning commissioners, and he said whatever day they met, it's like we all got together because we're a family, and we all sat down for dinner, and we discussed things, and some of them changed my mind. I was able to change other people's minds, but at the end, we were all family. And so this is how I treat this planning commission, and my role here is that 3 times a month, we get together on Tuesday night for dinner, and we have the opportunity to discuss. I know that I will be heard, and you have my promise always that I will always listen to everybody here. And Scott and Julie, you both have, I've heard you many, many times, and you have changed my thoughts on a lot of things over all these years. And so thank you for that. I really do appreciate that, because I sometimes walk in here wavering as to how I'm going to look at something. And by getting different perspectives from the two of you, it's the reason why I've voted on so many things like I voted. So I appreciate that. Both of you will be really missed. Julie, I remember when you sat down next to me for the first meeting, and I was a little, there's somebody new sitting next to me, and I don't know them. But it's grown into a great friendship. So I am looking forward to it going beyond our 3 dinners that we have per month. We can actually have dinner. We don't have to worry about quorum. So with that said, both of you will be really missed. And thank you for everything that you've done for me personally and for the city of Ann Arbor. With that said, is there any other commission proposed business? I will take Commissioner Mills.
I always do this. Mr. Leonard, could we add to the list? I feel like a year ago when we had a retreat, there was someone that was talking about an ordinance of trees on private property. Like a staff member, can you figure out who that is and see if we can get an update on what's going on? No, you don't remember this. Does anybody else remember this? Someone was talking about a potential regulation of landmark trees on private property.
So you're interested in
Just knowing what's going on.
if there's been any proposals to change the ordinance to require regulation of landmark trees on single-family residences?
Yes, I believe that's what it was. And I don't know if it was Amy Curris or someone else, but
I remember having this conversation during our retreat where you brought in a lot of staff from
The speed
various
dating.
departments. Yes, and I remember having that conversation with somebody.
I'll find it. In short, I have not seen such proposed language change, but I'll see if any work has been done in that regard.
Thank you very much.
You do always do that.
Any other? Commissioner Woods?
I want to move that Scott and Julie be permitted to take their name tags with them. Sometimes people don't let you do that.
As long
Well,
as
maybe
you,
not the whole thing, but at least their name tags.
as long as they promise to bring it back
Bring
in
it back
case
if
they
you get
are here for another meeting. All right. Well, second it. All those in favor? Aye. How much? I think this will have to
I'm
go
not
to.
sure you have the authority to dispose of city property.
I'm pretty sure this is going to have to go to city council. Yeah. Right.
That's not true.
Yeah, marijuana dispensaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, technically the circuit court has final say when someone appeals our decision.
So with that, I will take a motion to adjourn, moved by Commissioner Weatherby, seconded by Commissioner Trudeau. All those in favor, please say aye. Oppose? We are adjourned. Thank you.